Hello and welcome to the latest presentation of Why Can't We Be Friends? Mental health is societal health. Let's talk. So Why Can't We Be Friends is a small group of folks that are associated with GTX Connect, and we are in partnership with Dell Medical Community Initiatives. We host a free monthly webinar to have kind of a casual conversation with people that are in underrepresented or marginalized or just generally misunderstood groups of folks. And it is Mental Health Awareness Month. So what better time than this to kind of talk about this very interesting and often ignored topic. So we have three great panelists here tonight that we have recruited from the Central Texas area. And I'm going to go ahead and let them introduce themselves.
Hi everyone, my name is Tosin. I'm a recent graduate from the University of Texas at Austin with a degree in Human Development and Family Sciences. I have experienced mental health challenges such as depression, anxiety, and trauma since around the age of 10. I was finally diagnosed with borderline personality disorder when I was 18. I am a youth mental health advocate and an early childhood specialist. I collaborate with various organizations such as the National Alliance on Mental Illness to aid marginalized and vulnerable groups. I also write about living with mental illnesses, family sciences, and interpersonal relationships on my website, tosintalks.com. I'm here because I'm passionate about the mental and emotional well-being of the youth, and that starts with just talking and spreading awareness to reduce the stigma.
Hi, I'm Ellie. I've been living with bipolar depression my whole life, since early teens. I really wanted to be here because I'd like to help people be more aware of mental illness and that we're like everybody else.
Hi, my name is Marcia, and I have experienced mental illness, living with mental health conditions off and on through my own life, mostly in manageable forms, and also have experienced it as a sibling and as a daughter. But my primary area of advocacy for mental health is as a parent. So I have two children. Both have lived with mental illness. My daughter has lived with depression and generalized anxiety for a number of years, and may be changing her diagnosis to bipolar type 2. That's under debate at the moment. And then my son lived with serious depression, starting with some anxiety in middle school, and then really increased to severe depression by high school, and had strong suicidal ideations. And we did lose him to suicide about almost 6 years ago, when he was just about a month away from his 18th birthday and starting his senior year of high school. So the reason that I am here tonight, and why I've volunteered, just like Tosin, she and I are both volunteers with NAMI Central Texas. I just want to help equip other parents on how to talk about mental health in your home, how to make it as comfortable and normal and natural for you to say, hey, you've been walking around with that cough for a couple of weeks, we should go get it listened to. It should be as comfortable to say, hey, you really haven't seen yourself for a couple of weeks now, maybe we should talk about this, or seek out some help. You know, those two things, they should be just as easy to say the latter as it is to say the first. So that's my goal, is to help equip parents to make this something safe to talk about, and to help you know how to start getting help if you see a problem with your kids.
Okay. So again, I just want to say thank you to all of you guys for being here this evening to be able to go through these questions with us. For the people who are arriving in the room, I want to say welcome back if you have been here before, and if you have not been here before, I want to say welcome in general. So what we're going to do is, we have in the chat area, if you guys haven't been to Slido yet, that is our way for people to not only ask questions, but also to vote on questions that have already been asked. So how this works is I'm going to be here in the Zoom room, and I also kind of link over to our Slido page, and that's where I get the questions that I'm asking. So anybody who is a participant is free to ask questions. And then anybody who is a participant is also free to go ahead and get in there and vote on the different questions. The more people vote for a question, the higher it pushes it up on the priority list to be asked. So if people want to go ahead and take a moment right now just to kind of hit that link in the chat and check out some of those questions, you can vote on them. You can add more questions to it. And that will be accessible throughout, that link will be accessible throughout the entire presentation. So you can always kind of go back and forth if you don't want to read all the questions at once and kind of try to vote on things right this minute. And then the second thing we're going to have in the chat that Chuck is going to put up is it's a 1-question poll. It's just where are you zooming in from right now? And that really helps us to understand kind of what kind of audience that we are pulling in from around the Central Texas area and even sometimes beyond. So if you can click either one of those 2 links throughout the entire presentation. I will probably remind folks at the end, if they haven't filled out the 1-question survey yet, to go ahead and do that. And also there always might be people coming in a little late. So I'll ask again for those folks. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and move over to the questions. It looks like, oh great, it looks like people are voting. So that's really good and exciting for me. I like it when people vote on the questions because otherwise I'm just kind of going through and cherry picking myself. So this question actually had 6 votes, and it says, do you think they should be teaching mental health awareness in schools, and how young is too young?
I'm actually an educator. I teach at the middle school level, and I think that would be awesome if we could include that. We're starting to do a lot more social, emotional things in the classroom, but I think helping those kids understand that their friends may be going through something a little different would definitely help out.
I agree with Ellie. When I was getting youth mental health first aid certified, I realized that there are lots of people who are constantly surrounded by youth and don't know what to do when a youth is having a mental health crisis and they don't know the warning signs. So I think it's very crucial for educators to be aware of the signs and symptoms and how to help kids, and also how to help children talk to their parents about seeking help.
Yeah, absolutely. I fully agree, and I think it goes to a lot of levels, like making sure that we're equipping our teachers with how they can best respond to students who may be in a crisis, or being able to help spot a crisis, as well as with our kids as young as preschool, teaching them how to be very self-aware. And I'm seeing a lot of schools developing a calming room with some sensory things where kids can learn how to go in and help to regulate their emotions and how to get control of them. But I think we can go even so much deeper and start teaching the language and how to identify what you're feeling, and just being able to name something means that you can claim it and take ownership of it, and try to then navigate it better than when it feels like that it's controlling you. And that takes knowledge, that takes a lot of learning. That's not something that we just are hearing in everyday life. And I think it was, as far as like mental health is societal health, it's an investment if we can really make this a big part of what our kids are learning, whether it's as part of health class or whatever.
I think it also aids with a lot of early intervention too, if we teach kids younger about identifying their emotions and regulating them.
So the other piece of that question was kind of how young is too young? So Ellie, you had said, you're a middle school teacher, right? So do we see this as something that could maybe even be going down as low as elementary school, preschool?
I think so. I don't think it's ever too early. I mean, you have to be careful with the language the younger you go, but definitely as a middle school teacher, and I teach seventh, which seems to be an extremely sensitive year. I think the social problems that a lot of my students are having, if their friends understood, I think where these people may be coming from, because even I find out later and I'm like, okay, well, if I had known that, I could have been a lot more helpful. So I think giving them that power to be able to say, hey, my friend is acting different. And I was told when they act different, I need to go talk to someone about it. So giving them that idea that it's okay to go talk to a counselor or to ask their friend that if they're okay. I think there's just, as soon as they start socializing in a classroom setting, I think is the perfect time to start.
I have worked at early childhood development centers, and even as young as 6 months, we start teaching them about how to regulate their emotions. It always starts with the adult. The adult needs to be calm so that the child is able to be calm. But just really basic things, as basic as, learning how to breathe, learning how to pause and think through a situation before acting, learning conflict resolution in the most tiniest of senses. Like, if you want a ball, you have to talk to your friend and tell them, I want that ball, rather than acting out physically. Um, Even basic things like that is helpful for future emotional and mental challenges.
I'm going to go ahead and go to the next question. How important is medication in managing mental health? I know that's a big question. It seems like such a little question, but it's a big question.
So I probably have been on almost any medication that could be named to treat my bipolar. Without it, I don't think I could live the life I do. I'm a single mom, I'm a teacher, and I'm successful at both. Medication is something that I used to see it as a weakness, and now it's kind of, it's okay that I need to take medication. It's not my fault. And I think medication for mental health has definitely got kind of a negative, it's kind of negatively thought you have to take medication. And I have heard people say, you're kind of cranky today. Did you remember your medicine? So yeah, it's important, but it's not, I don't know. It's what's good for you, but I get worried about some of the more natural ways people are doing. My sister tried some of the more natural ways, and it didn't curb it enough that she could function. So medication is important on multiple levels, I think.
Yeah, I think it's so situational for each person. And I think that this is where it's really important to not self-diagnose and to seek out a trained professional in mental health so that you can understand, are you dealing with bipolar? Are you dealing with anxiety? Are you dealing with depression? Are you dealing, I mean, there's a whole, spectrum and long list of different mental health conditions that you might be living with, and the treatment for it might vary quite a bit. And then it also may change over time. When my son first presented with severe anxiety in middle school, he was able to get that managed through just therapy alone. But then his depression in high school, the therapist didn't even want to talk to him. She's like, we won't get anywhere until he can be more regulated with medication. We couldn't even break through. And then, with my daughter, she went for pretty much all of high school living with periods of depression and living with generalized anxiety that would kind of ebb and flow on the severity. But she really did not want to take medication, and that was a goal for her to try to manage it with coping skills. And she was able to do that successfully in high school and maintain her grades and all of that, you know, with just therapy and treatment that way. But then by the time that she reached college, with the level of stress that she was facing there, it became something that she couldn't manage on her own anymore. You know, coping skills weren't going to cut it. And that actually may be when, you know, bipolar type 2 may have started to present, which can be a common age for that diagnosis to come along. So, you know, her disorder changed over time to where then it became something that at least for now requires medication. It may not always.
So with the medication question, it seems like too that there's constantly new advances, you know, new breakthroughs, new treatments, new therapies all the time in this field. Sometimes when I think about it, I'm like, well, in the entire course of human existence, medication has only been available to for people to help them with mental health stuff for what, like 60, 70 years, something like that. I mean, maybe it's 100, I don't know, but it just seems like such a small little window of time, and that we're just kind of at the beginning of really understanding like all the opportunities that this is going to maybe present to people to be able to treat, manage, maintain mental health. And there is a lot of stigma, I think, sometimes when people say things like, oh, that person must be off their meds, or, you know, whatever the case may be. So I thank you guys for answering that question. And if you think of anything else you want to add to that later, you can always let us know. So the next question is, do you think that the homeless problem is also a mental health problem? Do you think that the homeless problem is also a mental health problem?
I believe so. This isn't like too much of my area of expertise, so I don't want to add too much information that I don't know too well about. But when I was hospitalized, a lot of the people that I met in the hospital were homeless and struggling with homelessness, and it's very obvious that the external experiences that you have will affect your mental health. If you're not getting your basic needs met, such as having a home, having food to eat, having proper water, clean water, it's very hard to maintain proper mental health in situations like that. So yeah, I definitely think that homelessness will affect your mental health and is a mental health problem.
I went through a period of time where I did not have much money, so I couldn't afford a doctor, couldn't afford medication. When I went to county for help, I was very limited on the medication I could take because they weren't going to pay for the expensive ones that I normally take and that made me stable. Given the choice of a medication like lithium that is not very successful, doesn't make you feel good, makes it hard. I can imagine it being tough for people to stay on their meds when they really need to, when they're not getting what they need, really, and you don't have opportunity for therapy. I think there could be a bigger budget for our mental health system, and that would, in my opinion, cut down on that homelessness because they could get what they need so they could go get a job because they're all capable of taking care of themselves. But my dad calls it the monkey on our back. Sometimes he wins. You know, it's if you don't have that med and you don't have that therapy to get your help.
I mean, that makes it almost sound, a large part of it is socioeconomic. You know, if you have limited means and you don't have a lot of money, I mean, I wouldn't have thought about what Ellie just said about having access to different levels, different qualities of medication based on your socioeconomic status. And lithium, although effective, also is it's like devastating to the liver. You know, some of the side effects of some of those medications are pretty significant, you know, and it seems like the people who are in that smaller socioeconomic bracket are the ones who are kind of given those limited options. I wouldn't have thought about that right off the bat, you know.
I have one medication that is $1,200 a month. So without the company actually having a help situation, I would never have been able to get it. And I had a good doctor who gave me samples as much as he could. So good medication, good provider, those are all very, you know, those are both extraordinarily important. But yeah, the situation trying to get medication on a limited budget is hard, because those medications, all of them are extraordinarily expensive. And they, you know, the generics, because they are new, like you said, there's so many new ones, the generics aren't going to be possible for, you know, I think it's 10 or 15 years they can hold off on letting generics be made.
That sounds like something that needs attention, you know, like the length of time it takes to make a medication generic. I don't know. All right. Anybody have anything else to add to that before I go to the next question? Okay. Let's see. What is the best advice you can give, it says me, for interacting with people with mental illness? So the question is, what is the best advice you can give me for interacting with people with mental illness?
Well, I mean, first I would say you're probably on a daily basis already interacting with people living with a mental health condition, and you don't know it. You don't know that they're living with generalized anxiety or depression or you know, whatever. I mean, you know, we're all here, we're holding jobs, we're, you know, living our lives, and probably most people wouldn't know, you know. It's so, you know, you may be thinking, I guess it depends on kind of what kind of situation, like, is it someone who's maybe having, you know, in a moment of crisis, or, you know, something like that, which, you know, I would say if it's a moment of crisis, you know, getting the appropriate kind of help would be good. And also just trying to be a calming influence, and just doing a whole lot of active listening, and accepting what they're telling you at their word, and not trying to discount or talk anyone out of how they're feeling. I know that can be, you know, speaking again as the parent advocate, that can be something that parents like to do. We want to try to teach our kids perspective, and like, oh, you know, this really isn't so bad, or, you know, it could be like this, or, you know, so don't let this worry you. And you know, that's then really causing a disconnect for this person, that no one's understanding them, and that no one's hearing what they're saying, and no one's understanding maybe the deep depth that they are feeling at that moment. And you know, can just cause can cause that crisis to escalate if they're feeling isolated and alone, rather than heard and understood, and that you are just going to solidly be there for them and stand by them.
Okay.
To add on to what Marcia said, I would suggest getting mental health first aid certified, so that you're aware of the different signs and symptoms, and what to do in terms of crisis, and how to speak to people who may be struggling with mental health challenges. But overall, just talk to them like you would talk to your friend. Hear them out. They're just like everyone else.
So mental health first aid certified.
Mm-hmm.
That's a thing?
Yeah. I got certified through Integral Care. It was free. Yeah, they have adult mental health first aid and youth mental health first aid. And I got certified in both they're not too different. Teens are just very particular.
That's good information to have.
Mhm.
So integral care, that's Austin, Travis County Integral Care.
Mhm.
It makes me wonder if in Williamson County, I believe it's Bluebonnet Trails is the provider, and I wonder if they have something similar. So, all right. So the next question is, what do you think is the biggest stigma in discussing mental health?
That it's a failing of your character in some way, that, and I know, have someone very close to me who lived with serious depression for a lot of years who, wouldn't get help because it was seen, she viewed it as a lack of her faith, that her faith should be enough. And if she just had stronger faith, and, I don't know that you would view any other health condition the same way, that cancer is a failing of your faith. So there can be so many reasons for stigma, but I think a lot of it is that with kids and adolescents, their parents may not want to acknowledge it because they think it's a reflection on them and what kind of a parent that they are. And then for adults, you just feel like that you may be feeling like that it makes you less capable. And yeah, that it's like a personal failing on your part in some way.
I agree with that. Living with it for most of my life, it has been a challenge. People hear, I tend not to tell people that I have bipolar depression. Most people don't. They just, if you have bipolar, you're like the guy who shot up the movie theater. They said he had bipolar. That's kind of a hard thing for me. Every time I see some kind of violent act, I kind of cringe and wait for them to use that word, like, oh, please don't say he has bipolar, because it's so hard to make people understand we're not all the same, just like every person isn't the same. You can't say every person with blonde hair is the same as all the others. So we're no different in that sense. We have an illness, and it's not anything we can control, and we're not all the same. I think for me, like dating, because I'm single again, I don't want to tell people that I have it. So it's kind of like, do I tell them first so I don't get attached? Because if I tell them too late, so it impacts your whole life. You don't tell people at work. I work with middle schoolers. I know I'm capable of doing it, but is everybody going to be comfortable with me doing it? So it really does impact every part of your life. With people, they don't understand it. I think if we really did have more of a community, way people could understand it better, rather than making it seem like there's, the crazy person talking to themselves on the street corner. There's people out there. There's people in, our government who live with mental illness that are doing just fine. So I think it's just completely misunderstood. That's where the stigma really comes in.
I think there's different the stigma changes depending on the group you're talking to, but I think one main stigma is that people feel as though there's something wrong with them or they've done something wrong. When looking at teens and children, they feel as if they've done something bad. A lot of the times their symptoms or traumatic responses are misunderstood as bad behavior. And then one problem that I noticed when teachers are trying to talk to parents about their child's mental health challenges is oftentimes the parent will feel guilty and feel as though they failed as a parent, like Marcia said. With that, the children also internalize the messages that they hear their parents using towards people with mental health challenges. A lot of people view people with mental health challenges as flawed or weak or just crazy. And children hear those messages and internalize them, and that keeps them from getting help. But yeah, the main stigma that I struggle with is the something's wrong with me or I've done something wrong. I always feel like if a symptom shows up, I often take it as like I've done something bad, or if there wasn't something wrong with me, then maybe like this friend wouldn't have stopped talking to me, or even something completely unrelated, like I wouldn't have gotten a bad grade.
So one of the things that Ellie said was kind of just having more community understanding, and it sounds like compassion. And then it just kind of made me think of what we were talking about earlier with having these conversations with our children and in schools. And, you know, I have noticed the last, I don't know, 3 or 4 years, there's a lot more talk about emotional regulation, which that wasn't happening when I was in school, you know, like, so that's definitely a step, hopefully, in the right direction. So let's see. Oh, I'm looking at this question, and since Tosin had just said that, the question is, how do you feel about the word crazy? No.
I personally don't think it's a word that should ever be said to anyone. In my culture, in Nigerian culture, that's a really huge insult. Even saying, I have to be specific in the way I ask my mom if she's upset, because I can't say, "Are you mad?" I have to say, "Are you angry?" Because mad and crazy are such offensive terms. And if we think about it, whenever we do use that word, typically it's not in a positive light. It's not, well, sometimes it is. Sometimes I'm like, that party was crazy. But I don't think it's anything that should be used directly to someone, because most of the time it's not used in a positive light. And I don't think people like being called crazy. So, yeah.
I agree. It just shouldn't be used. Yeah, it was a crazy party. That's cool. People shouldn't be crazy, though. That's definitely not cool. That definitely hurts. Somebody refers to you as crazy.
Yeah, it's like the difference between, wow, I made a really stupid decision, and then deciding to then label myself as being a stupid person. It's like, I'm not a stupid person. You know, I made a bad choice. You know, it's like, you know, if someone's in a mental health crisis, then, and they're acting kind of outside themselves and they're beyond reason. And, you know, then yeah, that behavior may appear crazy. That doesn't make a person crazy. So yeah, words are important, language matters, and we just have to be careful with our words.
So it's kind of like that word has been weaponized, right? If somebody is coming to somebody and saying to them that they are crazy or they're acting crazy or being crazy, it seems to me that that's like an immediate, like, what's the like, it's escalating it, right? Like, that is definitely not in the de-escalation skills toolbox. But you know, it's insulting, you know. And I think it would almost make a situation, like I said, it doesn't de-escalate the situation. I think it would make any situation that I can possibly think of, you know, worse. I mean, I don't think anybody really anywhere wants to be called crazy, and I think that people who are struggling with mental health stuff probably especially resent it. And I definitely,
If you're in a crisis, that's actually, you know, if you're feeling down, it's going to make you feel even more down, because look, everybody around me sees there's something wrong with me. And if you're getting kind of more on the upper side or in mania, it might make you angry and make you act out more. So it's definitely not helping in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah. Okay, here's one. What do you wish everyone knew about mental health and recovery?
I wish more people knew that it is not a straight, well-polished road. It's very bumpy, but you can make it through. It's like any other road in Texas. They've all got some bumps in there. They've all got some potholes, but you make it home. Yeah, I just wish more people knew that it's definitely possible to live a happy, healthy, successful life with mental health conditions. Recovery is very possible, and yeah, it's not a one-way road. It's very bumpy, but you can make it through.
I actually gave up on myself a long time ago and thought I couldn't do it. I couldn't get through school because I had to leave college. And it's not true. You know, a lot of people around me were telling me that this mental illness was defining me, this mental health issue I had. And I finally had a doctor who explained to me it's a disorder. Lots of people have lots of different disorders. It doesn't define your life. You can do what you want. And I did. I pulled myself together and I finally went back to school, got a teaching certificate. And, you know, I was a recognized teacher this school year through all the craziness, which I can use it in that sense, right? Because I think we can all say a school year with COVID is definitely a crazy situation. But that's for me. I wish I could tell more people that, hey, I have this disorder. It's difficult to live with. A lot of people struggle with it, but I made it. I'm living a great life. I'm extraordinarily happy. I'm probably the happiest I've ever been. And so nobody should, you can feel low, but there is a way out. Like, I love the potholes and the bumpy road and all that, because when you live with it, or someone who's living with it, yeah, you have to be there for the whole thing. There's going to be ups, there's going to be downs, there's going to be little bumps and big bumps. So, but you're always going to come out on the other side. Just, be there for that person that's struggling with it, or believe in yourself if you're the one struggling.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would just add that I think it's what I wish that people would understand is that it's important to seek treatment early on. One of the statistics that I share in the NAMI presentations that I do is that the average delay in treatment from the onset of mental health symptoms can be 8 to 10 years. And there's no other health condition where you would wait 8 to 10 years to go seek out treatment. And most people who live with a mental health condition have shown signs or symptoms by the ages of 12 to 14. And so we're waiting until we're in our adult years to finally break down and go get help. And we don't have to be living this way. We can have such a better and richer and fuller life when we're seeking out treatment. And like we've talked about, that treatment can mean a lot of different things. It may mean medication, it may not mean medication. It may mean brief periods of needing someone to talk to help think through, do I have thinking errors? Am I just thinking things through the wrong way? And just help to coach you through that, because mental health conditions are so common, so just unbelievably common, but also very, very treatable, especially when we can address it early.
It seems like the earlier the better, which just makes me think even more about addressing these things in schools. I feel like we're just doing a really bad job when it comes to talking about mental health with kids. And especially when you talk about that age range. I mean, Ellie and I are in the same kind of age bracket. We're both Generation X, y'all. Oh, yay. So, but when she said, "Oh, I was diagnosed when I was 12," my first thought was, "Oh, you're so lucky." You know what I mean? Because in my mind, I was thinking you got to know early, like when something would be off, that there was something you could call it, you know? And so if it's the earlier, the better. And then what you said, Marcia, about that being the age range. And then there's like a whole nother like window of opportunity when people go to college because of just like, neural pathways and brain development and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, so it just seems like the earlier, the better. And the more we talk about it, the better. And, but yeah, that's just a really interesting. You guys have some really great insights. I'm so glad. And I have a lot of passion about mental health and mental health awareness. So I'm super excited to be here with you guys talking about this tonight. So yeah, let me see. The next question is, I had one kind of picked out. Oh, here, this is an interesting one. Do you believe any specific restrictions should be placed on people with mental illness, such as gun ownership, teaching, and daycare? I know.
Obviously, no. um, I think that's part of getting away from that stigma, that we're not able to be a functional part, a beneficial part of society. I have several past students and current students that would be very sad if I suddenly decided to stop teaching. It doesn't impact my job, doesn't impact my parenting. I think that's probably one of the hardest things that I hear, is that we should have some kind of control over us, which is, to me, there are people out there that I'm more scared of having a gun than just saying, if you are diagnosed, you can't have a gun, or you can't teach, or how many great people would we miss out on? So limiting, I think we're just part of society. And so considering gun ownership or teachers should be based on the same thing as everybody else. Are they good at their job? Are they making safe decisions, or are they, committing crimes? So I don't see why we should have any other standards.
I think doing that, one, I don't like having control over anyone. That's kind of a scary word for me. But I think that would hold us back a lot. That would prevent a lot of people from seeking help, from admitting that they may have a problem, admitting that they may be struggling with mental health issues. And we would be missing out on a lot of great teachers and childcare workers. I remember when I wanted to start nannying, and I was told, why would you nanny? You're too depressed for that. I don't know what that had to do with being a nanny. But I'm really glad that I didn't listen to that, because being around kids is actually one of my coping mechanisms. Teaching children how to manage their emotions has taught me how to manage my emotions, and has taught me patience. And I would be very devastated if I wasn't allowed to be around children simply because I may be suffering with mental health conditions, or struggling with mental health conditions, rather. Uh, yeah, I don't think we should put controls or restrictions on people, especially not adults who are trying their best to manage their signs and symptoms.
Yeah, I think just like with anything, this is situational. We can't, we could never just blanket across the board and say, you've been diagnosed with this, so all of these things are off of the table for you forever. I mean, that's kind of absurd, I think. But you know, like my family, you know, my husband is a responsible gun owner, and when we realized that our son had suicidal ideations, those guns were gone from this house, you know, as fast as we could get them out, because we knew that someone who is suffering with living with suicidal ideations and struggling to keep a handle on them should not have access to lethal means as much as we can control them, you know. But you know, someone else, that may not be a part of their depression struggle at all. You know, they may not be struggling with suicidal ideations, and you know, on the you know, as far as fear of harming oneself, and then as far as fear of you know, violence, like Ellie talked about, just hoping that somebody doesn't say the bipolar word, you know, when something's happened. You know, when you look at the statistics, someone living with a mental health condition is has a far greater likelihood of being a victim of violence than of perpetrating violence. You know, so we just can't paint these things with a wide brush. And of course, I mean, teachers, you know, it's the person I talked about that lived with depression for many years and didn't want to get help because of her faith. She was an outstanding first grade teacher, and I just can't even imagine all of the lives that she wouldn't have touched had someone told her that because she had depression that she couldn't be around those kids, you know. But you know, if someone, you know, it should be no different than if maybe someone has a substance abuse problem and is you know, showing up drunk for school or something. You know, it's like, if something is happening specific to that situation, then do something. But to paint it with a wide brush, I would not agree with that kind of policy.
It's kind of like making assumptions that all people with mental health struggles are violent or aggressive, or, you know, and that is a really big, broad blanket statement. And there are tons of people who are violent and aggressive and have no mental health diagnosis whatsoever, and vice versa. And of course, you know, when they sensationalize in the media, you know, but like what Ellie was saying, I mean, it captures the world's attention, the nation's attention, and it is sensationalized, and, you know, and then the focus becomes something a little bit different. But all right, let's see. Oh, how do you think Texas is doing caring for people with mental health struggles? Or you could say, think Austin, or you could think Williamson County or Central Texas, or however you want to think about that.
I will say there's a lot of work to be done. There's always room for improvement. So let's start there. But I will say that good on Austin for adding a mental health provider to speak to people when they call 911. So now when you call 911, you can be directed to the fire department, the police department, EMS, or a mental health professional. So there's some positives, but yeah, I definitely think that there's still a lot that we could be doing, such as making receiving mental health services more affordable. I know that that's one of the biggest reasons that keeps people from seeking help, is not having the financial ability to. So.
Yeah, I agree. I think affordability is huge, and the state could really make a difference there. And you know, something that, you know, people like to say all the time, you know, mental health doesn't discriminate. You know, it comes after anyone, and it's like, okay, but the system does. You know, the system does discriminate. You know, if you don't have coverage, if you don't have good insurance, and you know, it just, your options for help can be so limited. And then if you need some kind of really specialized help, you know, I know someone whose son has schizophrenia, and you know, she basically got to the point where she was hoping that something would happen where he would be arrested, because that was the only way to get to the type of facility that could effectively treat schizophrenia. It's like, how messed up is that system? You know, that is really messed up, because think about all the things that can go wrong in the process of him being in a situation where he could be arrested. You know, it's and to think that she was feeling like that could be the best outcome for him, so he could finally get the kind of treatment that he needed that she couldn't get for him otherwise. Even though she had coverage, she had insurance, she had resources, she still couldn't get it just because of the way that it's set up. And I won't digress into all of that, but yeah, I think Texas has a long way to go and needs to prioritize this.
Okay. That kind of leads pretty well into this question. What do you think about policing and people with mental health issues? Do you think they have enough training to manage situations with people in distress?
So I have had experience with law enforcement during a time of crisis, and I personally believe that there could be more specified training to helping people who are experiencing mental health crises. The situation could have been avoided had they been told what to say and what not to say to someone who is experiencing trauma. You should not be asking if you can touch someone. They don't want to be asked that during a time like that. So yeah, I think there could be a lot better training, but honestly, I think that the addition of a mental health provider is a better option. Sometimes that's just not their job. Law enforcement does law enforcement. If they're not, if we're not going to put in time and effort to give them proper training, there are people who have training for that. Put them in to do that job. There are people who are specified to do youth mental health services. There are people who are specified for adult mental health services. There are people who are specified for each disorder. So I think putting them in would, one, prioritize mental health, prioritize those jobs that offer mental health services. Yeah, so we could offer training to law enforcement. I think it's good for everyone to have training on that, but I think a better option would just have the people whose job is to take care of people with mental health challenges do their job.
I think we could probably give some training on sensitivity. It sounds like that was something that she's saying. Knowing how to identify what do I have on my hands, rather than I'm going to take care of this because I'm a police officer and there's a disruption of some sort. But making sure they're trained to handle it sensitively and knowing when it's time to bring in those people who handle it better because they're trained to do that. I think that would definitely be the best way to get them trained, because it's unreasonable and unlikely that you get every police officer to be trained to handle a situation involving a mental health crisis.
Yeah, agreed. I think we need, it's hard for me to see how police officers, for their daily duty and all the training that they go into for that, could get the level of understanding to properly address, you know, someone experiencing psychosis, for example, or some kind of a mental health crisis point. And you know, at a minimum, be trained on how to not make it worse. But ideally, like Tosin and Ellie were saying, you know, let's have a mental health crisis intervention team, and that should be who is responding. And you know, if an officer needs to be there as backup should something turn, in the unlikely event that it turns violent, then that may be appropriate. But otherwise, you know, I just don't see how, you know, if they were trained for mental health professionals, then they probably wouldn't be a police officer. They'd be a mental health professional. It's like we're expecting them to be able to do something that they're not trained to do, and that's not right for anyone. And we can see that it's leading to disastrous results for all of them.
So I think this topic is really interesting, and I actually have a friend that I was talking to recently, and he is a police officer for UT on UT campus. And he was saying the majority of the time that he responds, the majority of the time, it is a mental health situation. And he's just like, that's not my job. That's not what I'm supposed to be doing. And not only that, but he literally said, I don't have time. I don't have time to be with this person for the amount of time that it takes to regulate and manage a situation like that. So he was kind of saying something similar to what Marcia is saying, like, you know, you can have training for sensitivity to maybe identify, but ultimately there are people who specialize in that kind of thing, and those are kind of the people who need to be called in. So really the training would probably revolve around like identifying and then passing it off to the appropriate people to respond, right? And there can be maybe officers even that do specialize in that. But it isn't their job, and I don't think they want it to be.
I think another thing that I want to add is when law enforcement responds to mental health crises, that typically makes the person who is having the mental health crisis feel as though they're in trouble. Because I know that's how I felt. I was put in the back seat, and I was even told by people, well, they should have handcuffed you for trying to hurt yourself. And that's not going to make anything better. That would make a person more defensive. That would make a person more upset. Truly, I don't think I would have gotten that bad had I been responded to by someone who was trained on how to respond to someone in a mental health crisis. But being around law enforcement kind of made the situation worse for me, because I felt as though I was in trouble and I was going to receive punishment because of the way I felt.
So it is we're basically hitting the 8 o'clock time frame. So I'm going to ask one, maybe at the most two more questions, and then we will wrap this up. So I have a question here. What kind of questions do I ask my child, friend, or it says self, that won't offend the person? I don't know why they put self in there. What kind of questions do I ask my child or a friend that won't offend the person? So I think they're trying to get at kind of a way to approach people maybe without being offensive to them.
So one thing, Tosin's probably seen it in some of the NAMI training, and there are classes for parents as well as family members and people that are supporting people living with a mental health condition, that they talk a lot about some of the language to use, and we talk about using I language. So instead of you've been doing this and you've been doing that, and then that can feel very finger pointing, and it can put up that wall and make someone feel defensive and make someone feel like that something is all their fault, as opposed to approaching the conversation with I language. So like, I have noticed that you're sleeping all day and staying up all night, and that worries me. That can be a sign of some mental health problems. Can we talk about how are you feeling? Just coming in with I've seen this, or I'm worried about this, and then just to be able to open up that conversation, but not in a way that makes someone feel like that they're doing something wrong or that they're being attacked or anything like that. especially if someone is living with a mental health condition or just generally like a teenager, then, using words needs to be very careful, because we need to be very deliberate and focused in what we're saying, so that we're not talking in circles and maybe being confusing or anything. So saying what you mean and meaning what you say, and being very careful in how you word it, so that nothing is feeling accusatory, and then sitting back to listen, and like I was saying earlier, just accepting what they're telling you as their truth, and not questioning them on what they're feeling. And then not to go too far down a rabbit hole, but depending on the situation, it may be time to also ask them, have you thought about hurting yourself? And depending on the answer, have you made a plan? Have you thought about how you would do that? Have you felt like that you want to die? Have you thought about what you would do? That's a very that's an important conversation to have, and to think about how you would have it. And there's a great resource that I'll just mention real quickly to help prepare you for that kind of situation, that kind of conversation. You can Google the Columbia Suicide Severity Rating Scale. It's a really great tool. School counselors use it, first responders use it, parents can use it, friends can use it. And
it's called the
Columbia Suicide Severity Rating Scale. It's developed by Columbia University. It's considered the gold standard. It's a series of questions that you can ask someone, and depending on the answers, the scale helps you understand the level of risk that you may be experiencing at that moment. Is this a okay, let's reach out, let's start getting some help, let's call your therapist in the morning kind of situation, or is this a we're on our way to the emergency room situation, or some level in between. So anyway, those would be my tips for how to try to start a conversation with someone, of just approaching it really openly, making sure that nothing is sounding accusatory, and being prepared to ask the questions about suicide.
So really being prepared to have difficult conversations and asking difficult questions, right? And just asking people, have you thought about hurting yourself? And if they answer yes, it sounds like the next question was, do you have a plan? I put the name of the Columbia, the way you said it, in the chat so that other people can reference it or copy and paste it or do whatever. Somebody earlier had mentioned, I guess in the chat also, again, about the mental health first aid. And I feel like we answered that pretty well. Do you want to go ahead and just summarize it again, Tosin, for maybe people who missed it?
So mental health first aid training teaches you about the signs and symptoms of common mental health conditions. You can get adult mental health first aid certified, as well as youth mental health first aid certified, and they just tell you how to talk to people who may be having crisis situations, or just you notice that they're struggling with signs and symptoms of a mental health condition. And it teaches you how to listen non-judgmentally and connect those people who may be struggling with a mental health challenge to professionals. We are not professionals. Mental health first aiders are not professionals. You are kind of the bridge between the person who may be struggling with a mental health condition and the professional. And yeah, it's a great resource. It's helped me immensely in my personal and professional life.
And you got the training from Austin Travis County Integral Care.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. And then Ellie, did you get a chance to answer that last question? Or did you have anything to add?
Which one? I'm sorry.
What was it? I think it was, are there questions? Is there a way that I can talk to somebody, or specific questions that I can ask that are non-offensive, or won't offend someone? And it said, I think it's a child or a friend.
I guess it would depend on how they're, like what context. because I think Marcia and Tosin covered that well. But I guess if people are talking about like, how do you ask about their mental illness? Most people, if you know they have it, they're willing to talk about it because, so, I mean, just be sensitive with your questions, you know, avoid those crazy words, or have you ever thought about hurting other people? Avoid those questions if you're trying to learn more. Be sensitive to the differences. And I mean, just like when you talk to anybody, you don't want to ask offensive questions. So, I mean, it's, I think I find this a lot. People ask questions, how do I do this? Or how do I approach this with someone with mental health disorders? And they're people. So sensitivity is the main thing. Just remember, just like you would talk to anybody else. So I think moving away from we have to talk to these people differently because they have a mental health disorder. When you don't, it's, I don't know, if they're in crisis, then yeah, you need to consider all of the, and like I said, Marcia and Tosin touched on that. Great. But otherwise they're just people. We're normal, everyday people. You know, you don't have to walk on eggshells around us.
So if somebody were to say something to somebody like, yeah, I have a mental health struggle, or I'm in recovery for mental health, is it inappropriate for somebody to ask a question like, what's your diagnosis? Or, you know, does that make sense? Like, is that?
Yeah. And I think that's really how well you know the person. Always, if you're going to ask, you always have to leave that door open saying, you know, do you mind telling me what your diagnosis is? If you're trying to maybe connect with them because you have someone in your life that has a mental health disorder, or you have one and you're trying to maybe find part of that community that you can connect with, then I would start with that, you know, say, hey, well, I struggle with, you know, what do you struggle with? And they may or may not open up and answer it, but compassion.
All right. So it is 10 minutes after 8, and let's see. I think I see something from Chuck. Oh, okay. So Chuck went ahead and posted the survey at the bottom. If you guys go into the chat room, there is another, I don't know if it's the same survey, but it's like a minute. It doesn't take very long. We don't ask people many questions. So if everybody could pop in there and take that survey from that link in Slido, that would be great. I just want to take this opportunity to thank everyone again for joining us this evening. You know, this is a sensitive topic. Obviously for you guys, it's a deeply personal topic. It's not always easy to have these conversations, and I think it's really brave when people just come out and really are able to have the conversations, be candid, be honest, be open. And I really thank you for your bravery and your ability to come here and be with us tonight and discuss these things. I think we've been given a lot of really great information, hopefully to improve our awareness of how to approach people who are struggling with mental wellness, which, you know, Ellie even said it earlier, I'm happier than I have been in a really long time. So having, you know, it doesn't mean it is a lifelong struggle, but not necessarily a constant struggle, if that makes any sense. And so I really appreciate all of you guys coming, and I will be in touch with the panelists again to kind of follow up from this. And, you know, thank you so much. And with that, I wish you a pleasant evening. Thank you.